You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher podcast, episode number 37. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast. I'm Katie Wardrobe, a music technology education trainer, speaker and consultant from midnightmusic.com.au, where I help music teachers use technology effectively in music education. In this episode, I'm going to share some ideas for using the free interactive music website called Incredibox. I'll be mentioning some links and videos and other resources during the episode, and as usual, you can find all of those on the show notes page for this episode, which is midnightmusic.com.au/37. So I mentioned that today's episode I'll be focusing on the website called Incredibox, and it's a free interactive music website which has been around since 2009. I think that's when it first appeared. I started running workshops and doing what I'm currently doing today in late 2008, and it wasn't very long after I started doing workshops and training music teachers that this website appeared, and it kind of came across my desk as things do, either on Twitter or Facebook. Someone shared a link somewhere, and I thought it was kind of a cool website. Now, if you haven't looked at it before, and I know a lot of you have and are already using it with students, it features some guys, I like to call them dudes, on the screen, and underneath there's a row of icons, and the icons represent different musical loops. They're like loops in a loop library. If you've ever used a program like GarageBand or Mixcraft or any of those programs that have a collection of snippets of sound, it's a little bit like that. So you can drag one of those icons onto one of the dudes and he starts singing or beatboxing. Once you've done that, another guy appears next to him and you can add another icon to him and you can continue until you have a full screen. Now, all of the icons are really great because they're all contrasting and they are a combination of pitched sort of melodic sounds or beatboxing type sounds. You can have up to 7 guys at once on the screen and you can use lots of different combinations. You can get rid of a guy and put a different one up on there. You can mute or solo the ones that you have in your ensemble. And you can also record your performance. Now, they brought this record option into the second version of Incredibox. There's actually 4 different versions in the online version of the website, and version 2 onwards has a record function. And I thought this was really great when they brought this in because it actually gave the website I thought it gave me a lot more scope for doing meaningful things with the website itself now that you can record. Now, I'm going to play you a little snippet just in case you haven't heard Incredibox. Here's a little snippet of what version 4 sounds like. And you're going to hear some of the beatboxing sounds and then adding in some of the melodic sounds. And it's just a short example. So that was version 4 of the website, and I think that version came out in 2014 or so. So that's sort of the most recent one in the web version of the Incredibox website. Now, you can also get an iPad version for this, and the iPad app is a paid app, and it's very, very similar. I find it's kind of more easy to play, in inverted commas. You can kind of perform the dudes like a keyboard almost, because you're touching on the screen with your fingers as opposed to using a mouse on the screen when you're using the web version. The iPad app actually has one extra version called Brazil. It's their version 5, And this is actually my favourite one. It's a little bit unfortunate that it's only available on the paid iPad app. I see a lot of comments from Android users and people who don't have iPads generally wishing that they could get access to the Brazil version because it sounds really cool. Here's a little snippet of what that Brazil version sounds like. Now, at first glance, when you open up Incredibox and take a look at it, it may seem a little bit like a novelty website where you kind of just go and you put some sounds together and it sounds all cool and that's great. And, you know, some people have commented to me that there's not a lot of musical input and that they would class it as a Friday afternoon activity. Now, I actually want to contest that. I don't think that it's that novelty. I actually think there are lots of substantial ways that you can use it. And yes, students are not composing from scratch, but I wouldn't use it for that particular purpose. I would actually use it to reinforce or teach other specific concepts that you might be doing with your students. Now, as always with technology, it's really good to think about what is it that you're teaching first, and then can the technology help you with that, or can it reinforce it, or can it present a concept in a different way for your students? So the things that I've used Incredibox for are to explore beatboxing itself and to talk about the art of a cappella singing. Beatboxing illustrates this really well, and the fact that you can turn on and off parts allows students to explore different layers in a piece of music. Because you can fit 7 guys on the screen, you can have up to 7 parts singing at once. So it can be quite a complex kind of sound, but it's really fantastic because you can do that muting or soloing of parts and explore all the different ones. In that same vein, it's great for talking about texture in a piece. It's really good for talking about form because you can do some things with Incredibox when you are creating your own recording, and which is basically a performance. You can create your performance in such a way that you're illustrating specific things to do with form that you might be discussing with students. So you might be perhaps talking about section A and section B being 2 contrasting sections in a piece of music, and then you could get students to demonstrate that by creating some kind of thing on Incredibox that shows 2 contrasting sections. You can also combine Incredibox on the screen with some sort of performance element. So students can either perform along with Incredibox and use that as a backing, or you can do some kind of live performance things, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm actually going to share some specific lesson ideas that either I've come up with or some other teachers have told me about. And that's one of the things that I think is a great way to use Incredibox, to combine it with some kind of performance element. Other things that you might want to reinforce or teach using Incredibox are remixing or arranging skills, kind of a similar concept there. And lastly, listening, using it for listening exercises. So you can do some kind of ear training work in a very specific way, basic way, using Incredibox too. So I've been putting together a series of lesson plans with videos and other resources for my online music tech community, and I came up myself with 4 different lesson plans for Incredibox and have put those into the community. I decided recently that I would actually ask my Facebook page followers, so this is my Midnight Music Facebook page, if they had also been using Incredibox with students, and if they had, what sort of things had they been doing? So it was great to see some of the responses. I was really fascinated to see how people had been using Incredibox, and I thought that I would share some of their ideas and some of my ideas in this podcast in case you want to go and explore it yourself. Now, the first idea is a listening activity, and this was from one of the teachers on the Facebook page. Her name's Eleanor Tucker, and she described an activity that she does with her students, and she said that she's done this as a kind of a short game with students from grades, she said K to 10, so right through a big range of ages. Of course, you would adapt it for each different age group. But the basic concept is to choose one of the versions of Incredibox, to set up the screen with 7 guys. Now, I'm sort of filling in a few gaps here because Eleanor gave me a brief outline, so this is how I would do it based on what she said. So you fill up your screen with 7 guys and maybe less. I'm guessing that probably with the younger grades, the younger students, I'm guessing that you'd maybe pick fewer guys on the screen. But the idea here is to assign each student one of the Incredibox voice parts. Now, they just need to listen and be familiar with that part. They don't necessarily need to sing it or beatbox it back again. But what she gets them to do is a recognition exercise. So the students turn away from the screen, and then Eleanor randomly turns the Incredibox voices on and off. When students hear their matching Incredibox guy, they have to stand up, and they have to sit back down again when their one is turned off. So I can imagine if I was doing this with a group of students, you would have, at different times, you would have maybe one group of students standing up. A second group might also stand up because you add a second sound in. The first group might sit down, you add a third group in, and so on. So she does it as a short game, as I mentioned before, with her students, and I think that's a great way. It's just like a listening identification game. Now, one of the games that I've suggested to members in my community is called Singer or Beatboxer. And I've suggested that you could play this as a game with students. And basically, as a class, you'd need to do a little bit of groundwork here. So as a class, you might discuss the difference between the different Incredibox guys. Now, some of them have percussive sounds, and some use pitched sounds. So they are singing or they are beatboxing. And you could, as a class, do this as a group together, first of all, choose a few and go through each of them and get everybody to identify, is this one a singer or is it a beatboxer? And is this one a singer or a beatboxer? And just use a few as an example. Then after that, if you've actually got access to multiple devices that students can use, you could send them off into individuals or as small groups. And they could each choose a version of Incredibox, and working by themselves, they could go through and identify all of the sounds in that version and decide whether they are singer or beatboxer. Now, when I was looking through all the versions myself, I actually found that there are a few sounds in some of the versions which are kind of a little bit on the fence. They are percussive, but occasionally they have a slightly melodic aspect to it as well. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this could open up discussion. You could actually, discuss as a class, would everybody agree that this is more of a percussive sound or more of a melodic sound? So great as a discussion starter there. Now, if you are a member of the Midnight Music community already, there's a walkthrough video for this activity, plus a downloadable activity sheet that you can print out and use with your students. It's like kind of like a game card so that they can sit down and there's a picture of each of the versions and then they can identify which ones are singers and which ones are beatboxers on that sheet. Now, one of the teachers on the Facebook page actually commented. Her name's Stephanie Perham. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sorry, Stephanie. And she said she's actually done this activity with her class. She said the students loved it and that it was amazing how many of them came to understand the difference between beatboxing and singing. So I was really happy to hear that that was a successful lesson that she had tried out. Now, the next suggestion is to do like a real-life performance version of Incredibox. And one of the teachers on Facebook, whose Facebook name is I'm going to say it wrong, I knew that. Violinoquist Roz. It looks like ventriloquist, but it is violinoquist. Mentioned that they do a real-life performance version of Incredibox with her grade 5 students. And she gets them to invent an ostinato using their voice. Then they get to dress up and sit in a row of chairs. And then another student acts kind of like in a conductor role. So they come along and they tap one of the students that are sitting down on the shoulder. That student stands up and they sing or say their ostinato until they're tapped again, which means they have to stop. And she mentioned that this gave students the opportunity to compose and understand how their ostinato fitted in with the others that were happening at the same time. And she says, of course, they had a very good understanding of Incredibox before we started. So good to lay that groundwork first of all and then go into this performance activity. So I think that was a great way to sort of do that practical side of performing along with what's going on in the Incredibox website. Now, another teacher on Facebook, Margaret Mary Opstalton, hopefully I've said that correctly as well, she does a thing with her grade 4 students and allows them to explore Incredibox, and then they create a track on Incredibox with some dance steps in mind. Now, what they do then is record and download their Incredibox track that they've created, and they then create a dance sequence to perform to. Now, this is a great way, again, to use Incredibox with a performance element involved as well. The downloading part of Incredibox, you can only do that on the web version. So if you've got iPads, it's not something you can do actually within the iPad app, but you can definitely do it on the website where put something together, record it, and then at the end you can download it. So you basically download like an MP3 version, and it's a really great thing to do and quite easy. This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by the Midnight Music Community. The Midnight Music Community is an online space for music teachers who'd like help using technology in their music lessons. There are online courses, video tutorials, lesson plans, music tech news, and professional development certificates are provided for any training that you undertake. I'm inside the community every day, personally answering members' questions and sharing tips and ideas. The best thing is that you get to connect with hundreds of other music teachers just like you and share your own experiences and occasional music tech frustrations. For more information and a special joining price just for the listeners of this podcast, visit midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. That's midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. Now, another one that I've done is to use Incredibox as a springboard for learning how to beatbox. In my community, I've put together the lesson plans and tutorial videos for this one where I suggest that you do some beatboxing sounds with students. So actually teach them how to make basic beatboxing sounds, particularly for the kick drum, the snare drum, and the hi-hat. And there are some fantastic tutorial videos on YouTube by a few beatboxers who do this really, really well, much better than I would do it myself because I'm not a great beatboxer. I can make some basic sounds and it's okay. But basically you could show students these other videos, get them to learn how to make these basic sounds, and then go to Incredibox. And one part of the activity could actually be to get students to identify which of the Incredibox guys makes a bass drum sound or a kick drum sound, which one makes a snare sound, and which one makes a hi-hat sound. Now, a couple of the versions of Incredibox have these really clearly. Not all of them do, and I ended up sort of going through all of them and identifying which version was the best for this exercise, and there's actually a couple of them. But basically, if you choose the right guys, you can find the one which is like the kick drum and the snare drum and the hi-hat, and then get the students to actually imitate them. So you could put, say, the kick drum guy up on the screen, get the students to imitate that and say or speak or beatbox along with the guy on the screen. Then you could get them to listen to the snare part and get them to imitate that. Eventually, I would probably split the group into two and get one part doing the kick drum sound and the other group doing the snare drum sound, and alternate for a little while. But then when they're confident and secure, you could get them to do those at the same time. So they're doing two independently rhythmic parts. Then when they're secure with those, you could add in the hi-hat sound. Everybody could learn that one. Then eventually you could split up into three groups and do the three parts together. Now, if students are a bit older and they're quite capable of doing that, they could even split up into small groups, so groups of 3 or maybe groups of 6, and do those beatboxing parts together in a very small group. Really good fun, and it's just a great way, again, to incorporate that sort of performance element with technology, which I really like. I like technology to slot in alongside, other things that you might be doing, and this is one way you could use Incredibox to do that with beatboxing. Now, the last suggestion I've got here for a lesson idea is to create a remix or arrangement using Incredibox, but with some very specific parameters for students. And I think this is where something that appears to be like a novelty website at first sometimes you can make it a lot more meaningful from an education point of view if you set some parameters. So I would set some guidelines around what do you want the students to include in their own remix, in their thing that they're going to record. Now, what you can do in Incredibox is do things like, especially if you're talking with students about form, you could get them to record an Incredibox composition, if you like, which has to include some kind of introduction, some kind of main part, and then an outro. Or you might do an introduction, main section A, main section B, which must be contrasting, and then an outro at the end. So you can put those parameters into place and make sure that students are including that in the recording that they put together. Now, inside the community, I took this a little bit further. I actually ended up putting together a longish lesson plan. Well, it's not long. I really wanted it to fit into a single lesson, but of course, as soon as I start thinking about these things, I get lots of ideas and then it becomes bigger than Ben-Hur and I end up adding a lot of stuff into it. A lot of it's optional, so you can take bits of it or do the whole thing if you want. But one of the ideas that I had was to actually use Incredibox to demonstrate the build-up of tension in music. And it's really common in a lot of top 40 songs, especially dance style tracks, where they build up the tension and it leads to what's known as the drop, where kind of like everything builds up and then it actually kind of goes away and then all comes in at once. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. As soon as you listen to a dance track, basically they all have it. It's that point at which the dance floor just goes off, and there's a lot of great examples that you can play for students. So one of the examples that I found was the song, it's a few years old now, but the song Clarity by Zed is a really great one. It has this build up always towards the chorus, and basically when the chorus kicks in, that's the drop in the music. You can demonstrate it even with older music. I actually found a blog post by this guy, and he was talking about this build-up of tension in music, and he cited a few pop songs, and that's where he actually suggested that song Clarity by Zed. He also suggested that you can identify a similar kind of technique in from the Planet Suite by Holst, the Mars movement. So if you listen to Mars, there is a really, really big build-up in a few places, but there's a couple of specific ones. And you can actually sort of identify that build-up, which is a similar technique to the one that's used in these more recent tracks and songs that are on the radio at the moment. So with Incredibox, you could, do that groundwork where you're identifying it and listening to some things, and then going on to Incredibox, getting students to record their own version of a remix, which includes this build-up of tension and the drop. Now, the way I've explained it in the community, I've actually done a demo video of this because you can do some really clever things in Incredibox with the solo and mute buttons to kind of have everyone on the screen, and then you can have everyone die off and then all come in at once. I've worked out a way to do that, which was really good. And so I think that's a great way to get involved with Incredibox, comparing it to something that students are listening today and getting them to create their own version. Now, a few other comments that were on Facebook, similar ideas really, a lot of people are using it in similar ways. Kathleen Whiteside said that she uses it with her 7th and 8th grade students to teach musical texture as part of beginning composition lessons, and that they love it. Robin Wyndham does another activity that I've actually suggested in the past as well, great minds think alike, which is to create a rap and then use Incredibox to create a backing track to go with your rap. That works really well. The only limitation with Incredibox is that you're locked into a single tempo. So you need to make sure that students devise a rap that works with the tempo that Incredibox is at, which is, it varies from version to version, but most are around 120 beats per minute and a couple are a bit slower, 100 beats per minute or so. Grace said that she uses it with her grade 6 students, and she has them compose a track that includes an intro and an outro, a riff, a break, and that incorporates ternary form as well. So that's that idea of using form inside Incredibox. Now, if you'd like to join in our Incredibox discussion on Facebook and perhaps add your own Incredibox lesson ideas. Maybe you've been using it with your students already. I'll put a link to that specific post on Facebook in the show notes. So if you want to click through to that and add your comments, I'd love to see what else you might be doing with it, if it's something different particularly. I love hearing about all the different ways that people use these websites. So that's it for today's show. Now, if you'd like more help using technology, I'd love for you to come and join me inside the Midnight Music community. So if you particularly want access to those lesson plans that I mentioned for Incredibox, or lots of the other ones that I've got in there, and the tutorial videos, and there's areas where you can ask questions about anything music tech related, you can come and join the community, and there's a special offer for podcast listeners at midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. The Music Tech Teacher podcast is hosted by me, Katie Wardrobe. You can find more information and links from today's episode at midnightmusic.com.au/37. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.